Welcome back, everybody, to the Off Base Sports Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Jason Benicki Critchlow, and you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, and YouTube at JASONBANICKI. You can find the podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Off Base Sports. The Twitter handle is Off Base Sports 1 because apparently somebody had already used Off Base Sports on Twitter. But like I said, please give us a like. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram. I'll try to keep everything pretty sports related. And as always, please subscribe, rate, and review to the podcast. We're on iTunes, Google Play Music, Stitcher, CastBox, Satchel, Spotify, even on Partridge in a Pear Tree. I didn't know that was a thing until yesterday. Just throwing you guys a little fun there. But anyways, yeah, like I said, please subscribe, rate, review. I want to just send a huge shout out and thankful for everybody who's listening and say, let's help keep growing this audience. A ton of people checked out my blog on offbasesports.blogspot.com. I posted one last week. I'm going to try and get one up again this week before the end of the week. But on this format, on the podcast today, I'm going to focus primarily on UFC 228 and then go from there. As I'm going to a Cubs game a little bit later today, so I don't think this will be a particularly long one. But there was a lot to talk about after UFC 228, so I think that'll give us a good starting point. And normally with these, I would stick to just the main card, but there was such an interesting occurrence at UFC 228 that I feel like I have to talk about one of the prelim fights, and that would be the Aljamain Sterling versus Cody Stamann fight, where we had Aljamain Sterling convert the second ever successful knee bar in UFC competition. I mean, it's been kind of a funky year for that, where you're seeing all these sudden submissions where you haven't seen them before, and now all of a sudden they're popping off and getting pulled off. And then, of course, it would have been one thing if Aljamain was the only person to do it, but that also happened. We also had a second knee bar of the day in the Zabit Magomedov-Shapirov versus Brandon Davis fight. And I'll get back to that fight later. But the really cool thing is that, I think anybody who's been watching Aljamain Sterling knows he's a guy who's coming on strong and is going to be a contender before too long for the belt. But it's just great to see a guy pull off something like that. Of course, then it's even funnier after the fight when you have him and Zabit's coach in the background talking like, man, we really didn't mean to steal your thunder on that, but we just started working on that like 2 weeks ago and just managed to pull it off. And they were both pulled off in very different fashions. So that was kind of cool because they weren't the same knee bar, but they were knee bars, So again, something that had only happened once before in 25 years of UFC competition happened twice in one night. And I think that kind of set the tone for how good the UFC 228 fight card was going to be. And it sets a really high bar for the rest of the year. I think it's going to be tough for any card to match what this one ended up being top to bottom in terms of at least the main card. And like I said, particularly when you add in the Aljamain Sterling prelim, I think it gave us a good start. That's for sure. Sterling was in control of that fight the whole way, and then just used his superior striking to set up the takedown that then set up the knee bar. It was really impressive to watch, and I think that sometimes it's what gets lost in watching UFC fights, or the people who refuse to watch them. Because as I was talking with one of my friends who's getting married on October the 6th, or well, not one of my friends, we have a whole group chat going on GroupMe for the whole wedding party. And I reminded him, hey, you're getting married on UFC 229. Guys need to make sure we wrap up the why am I drawing a blank on what? The party after the wedding, the reception before, Conor Khabib. And like the bride responded, "Oh, I'm not gonna cut short my party just so you can watch two sweaty men beat each other." It's like, I get that there's a lot of people who still just see it that way. But you know, and it's just unfortunate that more people don't appreciate the beauty and the art side of the mixed martial arts, because watching what Sterling did, it is pure artwork. Like, that's not just him getting out there and beating on a guy. And we'll touch on that concept of the art of the mixed martial arts here again before the end of my wrap up here. But I don't want to dwell too much on the prelims, because there were good fights there, but the main card absolutely delivered top to bottom. So your first fight was Abdul Razik Al Hassan versus Nico Price. So you're talking two guys who like to stand and bang. Two guys who like to stand and bang. And you can't fault this fight for not being, more than 2 minutes or, a minute. But, I mean, these guys just stood and bang, and then, Al Hassan did his work. He put Nico Price out in under a minute. And you could watch the whole fight in one clip, and you're just going to sit there. Did that just really happen? Did these guys just stand and bang like that to start a fight? Because you see so much. You saw it with the Darren Till, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson fight, where they're trying to get too technical and too worried about scoring points. And sometimes it's just great, again, to watch two guys just stand and bang and do their thing. And that fight was a perfect example of it. And it's what some people like it. It's what some people don't. And, that this card, I think, had a little of something for everybody. The one fight I would say was a letdown on this main card, though, was the Jimmy Rivera versus Josh Dodson fight. Not to say it wasn't a good fight, but it was pretty much all stand-up, very little attempts at takedown. There was a little bit of high kicking, but it became pretty easy. Rivera pretty much picked up Dodson's timing and sequencing of his striking pretty early, and then Dodson just didn't vary it much. And it's just kind of who John Dodson's become. He's kind of up and down fighter. If he gets fighters who can't pick up what he's doing, then he can beat them. If they figure it out real quick, then he's not going to win. These guys are at a low enough weight class that you're not seeing many knockouts. Again, I don't know if I would agree with the two judges who saw it 30-27. I do think Dodson got at least one round. So I would say it was 29-28, but it was just all in all a pretty boring fight. And it was the only really boring fight on the entire main card. So luckily for the UFC, they had that going for them. And again, it's not to take away from what Jimmy Rivera did, but it's just, I'm not a fan of the point fighting, and that's what Rivera was doing. These guys are just too afraid to fight. They want to win. They're not worried about the fight of it. And I guess it's why I'll always like guys like Nick and Nate Diaz, because they're there for the fight. They don't give a shit about winning decisions. I mean, they'll take decision wins, but it's not what they're there to do. They're there to end fights. That's why Nate Diaz has 17 finishes and has 20 victories. He's just not a guy who's out there pointing for wins, not trying to survive fights. He's trying to win fights. But like I said, I talked earlier a little bit about the Zabit Magomedov-Shapirov fight versus Brandon Davis. And hats off to Zabit, because he definitely lost that first round. It was both a short notice fight after a fallout due to injury. And you got to give a shout out to Brandon Davis. That's his fourth appearance in the ring this year. He's definitely going to try and get a fifth. He's trying to just be a very active guy, and the UFC rewarded him for it with a new contract before this fight. So hats off to the UFC for saying, look, you may not be on the same star path that Zabit is, or even, we may not even see you like a guy like Sage Northcutt, but you're the kind of yeoman, the yeoman worker that we need to have more of, and that we're going to be better off as an organization if we could have more of these guys who just, we're here to fight. I'm going to strap it up. I'm going to fight, even if I can't put on a full camp. Again, do I think Zabit stays where he's at for the length of his career? No, I think his body's too tall to stay at that low of a weight class. But again, you don't have to stay there forever. Sometimes if you can be a rising star like he is, you get in, you get your belt, and you go up a weight class, just like we've seen a million others do. And I would say Brandon Davis had won that first round. I think he definitely had set more of the pace than Zabit. He definitely outstruck him in the first fight. And then the second round, got a little over anxious, and Zabit was able to take him down. And once he got him down, then he started doing work. I thought Brandon Davis was about to get out, and then Zabit just pulled off that miraculous knee bar out of nowhere. And Brandon Davis tried to fight it for a second, but you could just see his hamstring was stretched out for all it was worth. And he really had no other choice but to tap or, risk a very severe injury. And that gave us our second knee bar of the night, third in UFC history. So in 25 years, again, I know I might be beating this home a little bit, but when you start thinking about an organization being, first off, a quarter of a century, and people still try to talk about the UFC as if it's young, which it is compared to other sports, but it's been around a while now. It's not something that's new, but still, when you have 25 years of history and something has only happened once and then it happens twice in the same night, I think that's something that deserves to be mentioned, and I think it's something that deserves to be celebrated. And again, when you add it to some of the, like the Google Plata that was there earlier this year, that, it's just great to see some of the intricacies of the jiu-jitsu game coming back as, more and more people had started focusing so much on striking because, A, that's what fans wanted to see. B, it's what the UFC research shows, that those who land the most significant strikes win more often than not. And C, it's what helped make fighters rising stars. It wasn't the tap out specialist for sure that got the most attention. On the other hand, like I said, I did thoroughly enjoy the jiu-jitsu on display in this main card. But when you get to that co-main event of Jessica Andrade versus Karolina Kowalczyk, that was just a good old-fashioned beatdown. There's no other way to put that. I mean, Jessica Andrade just took it to Karolina Kowalczyk, and I thought Karolina had stemmed the tide and figured something out, and then just eventually she just tried to go for one last thing, and at 115, and typically just period in the women's division, you don't see one punch knockout power, not even out of the Cyborg, but with Andrade, she had it that night for sure, because she absolutely gave Kowalczyk a true KO, which is, you see a lot of TKOs, you see very few real KOs in the UFC. And again, this definitely Andrade is in line now for a title shot against Rose Namajunas, which I think all of us should want to see that fight. I think you're going to see the power of Andrade versus the speed and skill of Rose Namajunas. And not to say Thug Rose doesn't have some power, but I would definitely say Andrade is on a different level with her power. And I think she'd be an interesting one to move up a weight, win a belt, move up a weight class, get another belt. And I think in the women's division, she could do 115, 125, 135 and clear all three belts if she can keep that speed and power as she moves up the ranks. Because, again, there just aren't many women that have that kind of knockout power, So it was fun. It was a fun fight. There was definitely some good exchanges in there where Kowalczyk held her ground. But I think by the 2-minute mark, right around when she got KO'd, I think you clearly just saw a fighter who was outgunned in that fight, and she knew it. And, unfortunately, the women's rankings are going to be a tough one to climb for a while, for a couple years. So I think there's going to be, like I said, I think in previous podcasts, I think Joanna and Jacek's going to have to move up to 125. And I think with a vacant 125 belt after being stripped, we'll set up a fight between Jacek and Shevchenko for that belt. I think the UFC would be smart to make that fight. I think, obviously, like I said, Andrade versus Thug Rose is the next fight at 115, and 135 is kind of on hold while Mana Nunez goes fight Cyborg, and then Cyborg is basically, ready to call it a UFC career. So the women's ranks are kind of tied up for a little bit, and I think we'll have some clarity, though, by the end of the year on where every one of those divisions stand. But I definitely can't finish up UFC 228 without talking about one of my favorite UFC fighters easily right now. And maybe that's just because I keep hoping Nick Diaz will get to fight him soon for his belt. And that's Tyrone Woodley versus Darren Till. I think you saw the effects of Darren Till trying to make the 170 weight cut, and I think it's easy to see that his future's at 185. I think he's just too tall and he gets too lanky, and it's hard to cut the weight. And I don't know if it had an effect on him, because it looked like he was fighting very similar to the way he fought against Wonder Boy Thompson. But, you know, when you go into a fight and you're almost 10 minutes in and you've landed one significant strike and 2 total strikes, it's pretty impressive that you weathered the storm that was Woodley clearly, you know, putting the pressure on, clearly just outstriking you. You know, had him wobbled in the first round and almost, I thought, had it ended there until survived that. Then in the second round, he just came out, floored him, was nailing him with ground and pound. I was surprised he survived all that. So Till's going to be one of those guys I think has one of those chins that he's just going to be tough to knock out, because he survived a beating at the hands of Woodley. However, Woodley was able to use, you know, well-timed striking when he had dominant position to move into position and land a very impressive Doris choke. I did not see it coming. And then all of a sudden you start looking at it, it's like, oh, wait, what? Oh, yeah, he got it. He got him. And I thought Till was going to hang on and try and fight out, but he tapped. And rightfully so, because once that thing was locked in like it was, he wasn't hanging on another 40 seconds. He was going to sleep if he didn't tap. And then it was great to see Woodley's coach give him his black belt after the fight. And you could see that Woodley was more impressed by that than retaining his UFC title. And, you know, I think that easily comes down to your black belts forever. UFC belts can come and go. But black belts are forever. And he earned it, that's for sure. That was an impressive submission. It was an impressive fight. And of course, all the talk now is where do these folks go from here? Like I said, I think if you really want to look at it, Rivera's got a chance to get a top contender fight, you know, an eliminator for a title contention after his, you know, Al Hassan's going to get another highly ranked fighter and a chance to go to work there. Zabit will clearly get probably a fight against a top 5 fighter at 145, maybe even Garbrandt. That could be a fun fight. Let's see what Zabit can do against Cody Garbrandt. Give Garbrandt a chance to get back on his feet. Give Zabit. Oh shit, I'm at the wrong weight class there. Sorry there. That would be a fun fight, but it's not going to happen. Zabit's at 145. You know, Zabit beat. Trying to think who would be for Zabit at 145. Anyways, he'll get a fight against the top 5 guy next. Brandon Davis will go back, do more work, and come back and fight whoever the UFC puts him in front of. Possibly another short notice fight so he can get another one in before the end of the year. He seems intent on getting those 5. Kowalczyk is gonna take some time to rebound. I think they gave her a 2-month medical suspension, so she's basically out the rest of the year before she's really looking for another fight. So there'll be some moving and shaking there. I think, like I said, Andrade gets Thug Rose. I think for Till, maybe I know he said he wants to continue to he's got unfinished business at welterweight, and he'd like to fight Woodley again. And I could see that fight happening again, not necessarily right away, because he absolutely just got owned. He's going to have to go back and do some work. But I think for him, his future's at 185, and I think it's just time to make that move. So you quit putting your body through that tough cut down to 170. And some of these guys, they really benefit from going up a weight class when they do it. Woodley, of course, everybody's calling for the fight versus him against the great American wrestling heel. I won't say his name because I'm not going to. I'm not giving him any shine. He's all fake all the time, and I just am really not excited by any part of that fight. I think Woodley would own him just as much as he owned Darren Till. I watched the fight where he won that fake strap, and it wasn't exciting. It wasn't good. He's not as good as Tyron Woodley. You know, again, being a little bit of a homer here, I think the fight I want to see next with Tyron Woodley is Tyron Woodley versus Nick Diaz. I know there'll be people, well, why does he get to come back and fight for a title right away? I get it. He's not quite GSP where he's never had a UFC title, but he did have Strikeforce, WEC. Basically, anytime he's fought in the UFC, it's either been for a belt or against a legend. He hasn't fought just, you know, other than very, very early in his career in very first UFC fights he fought, as he fought just random guys. So you're not going to see, a Nick Diaz, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson fight. You're just not. That's not a fight for him. It's not going to get him out of bed. It's not going to, I could see the UFC trying to make it. I just don't see him trying to do that fight. Colby Covington's been trying to talk. I just said that name. God damn it. Trash to Nick Diaz. But again, he's a wannabe poser. So let's just pretend like the Great American Heel is out of this discussion. I agree. I think that's going to be the fight, Woodley versus the Great American Heel, partly because Dana White seems to be in love with the Great American Heel and absolutely despises Tyron Woodley, which is a shame. The UFC should have been doing everything it could to promote Woodley. This is going to always be the thing that baffles me about the UFC, is that they talk down and negatively about their own fighters. It's like, you're the promoter. You're supposed to be hyping them up. You're not supposed to be picking winners and losers. You should be talking like every fighter is a winner. Like every fighter has a chance to be a champ, because you make more money when you make these guys more marketable. Woodley's a guy who's in movies already on his own, who, is getting ready. He just dropped some music this week. This is a guy who does a lot of things, never in trouble, has been a consummate professional his entire career. And I understand some of his previous title defenses were a little boring, but this is a guy who's also, you just saw him drop Darren Till, who was one of your big hyped guys at 170, and then Dars choke him. He absolutely dropped Robbie Lawler, who's been a mauler for years at that welterweight division. I get it. I think we're all over, or at least all big fans are over the point fighting, but there's not a lot you can do about that. That's the system as it is. That's the way it's going to be. I think it's just going to be tough for the UFC, if they keep trying to talk down guys like Tyron Woodley and Nate Diaz and guys who should be very marketable stars and make a lot of sales for them. And in the case of both of them, have made a lot of sales for them and could make even more if they would promote them and hype them up right, instead of acting like, well, they're just guys, or, we're happy to have them, but we don't really care if they do well or not. It's like, I get that Conor McGregor writes a lot of big checks for you guys and makes you guys a ton of money, but McGregor Diaz is the top 2 selling pay-per-views in the last 5 years for a reason. And it's not just Conor McGregor, because you saw in 205 when it was McGregor Alvarez, it didn't sell those same kind of numbers. So don't forget that you have other guys who are marketable, who can draw you numbers and who are going to make you dollars, and stop pretending that they can't or won't, if just because you're trying to preordain them. This is the reality of it, is if you would get behind Tyron Woodley and push him, you'd make money. If you'd get behind Nate Diaz and push him, you'd make money. You shouldn't just push a few select guys, and you shouldn't try to pick who the next people are, or guys or gals, because you've done it on the women's side too, very clearly. Just let the fights happen and promote everybody in every fight like they're the greatest person on earth. And then, yeah, some of them will be a little better on the mic skills and help sell those things. No matter how much I hate the WWE-ish production of like Danielle Cormier and Brock Lesnar, that does help sell extra pay-per-views. Like, unfortunately, it's just proven to be true. It's the reality of it. And I can't really finish up any discussion of UFC 228, of course, without talking about, once again, another weight-cutting failure in a UFC event. And that, I know this is becoming one of my constant soapbox issues, right there along with, the Bulls needing to fire Gar Pax. But again, rightfully so, this is, an ongoing issue that's going to continue to be an issue until the UFC decides we're out of this weight cutting business. ONE FC or FC1 or whatever it is has figured it out. No more of this water weight cutting. And as Joe Rogan talked about a couple of weeks ago, so shout outs to Joe Rogans for bringing it up finally too. Let's all get on the UFC and say, look, it's time to end this dangerous practice of weight cutting. We can re-rate the weight classes when we get people to their natural weight classes. Again, both Diaz and McGregor fights, neither of those guys cut any weight. They both fought basically at their walk-around weight. Because the first one they fought in, Diaz fought on 10 days, 11 days notice. We just didn't have time to cut weight to get to 155. And at that point, there was no incentive for Conor to cut weight either, so they just didn't. But again, they both fought, 166, 167, so they would have had to cut about 12 pounds. But, those are some of the less extreme weight cuts. You get some of these people who are dropping 20, 30 pounds. I was listening to an interview on Below the Belt podcast where Brian Ortega was talking about he walks around at almost 185 when he's not in fight camp. So you're talking between his normal weight to getting down to fight weight is a 40-pound difference. And are we surprised that there are health issues where these people get into electrolyte balances, their kidneys start to shut down? Again, I said it via tweet. I've said it via podcast. I'll say it again. What is the UFC waiting for somebody to die before they change these rules? The NCAA and the ONE FC have figured it out. We're going to figure out what your walking around weight is. We are going to do gravity tests to make sure you haven't cut water weight for these weigh-ins when we weigh you in regularly. And you can only drop X amount of pounds per week leading up to a fight. And then, like the ONE FC, you have to make weight every day of fight week. You can't just come in Friday morning, weigh in, and then have a day and a half to rehydrate and put on 30 pounds or 20 pounds for the fight. I think that's part of, again, what leads to some of the staleness of some of the fights, because Darren Till works so hard to cut down, and then he puts back on water weight, and now he's slower. Now he's physically fatigued from the weight cut, and then he's, now he's put on all this water weight, and now he's just slower because he's carrying around like dead water because he spent a day rehydrating, getting ready for the fight. I think it's past time to move on from the antiquated days of weight cutting. Wrestling doesn't weight cut anymore at the highest levels because they know the danger involved. They've decided we're not going to wait till somebody dies, and the UFC needs to get on that board as well. There's no reason for it. Boxing has had these kind of weight issues in decades because of this. It just gets to a point. Who cares if it's a 135 champ or a 155 champ if it's the same guy? And who cares if the 155 champ becomes a 175 champ? And again, maybe add in a couple extra weight classes as well so you don't have these issues with people feeling like they're stuck in between, where all of a sudden you have to go from 170 to 185 or 155 to 170. 15 pounds is a big difference. And again, as Joe Rogan put it, weight cutting is a bigger issue in the fight game than steroids are. Because when you can outweigh somebody by over 20 pounds on fight day, that's a big advantage, and it's a big issue in the ring, and it should be talked about more, and it needs to be talked about more. So I'm calling on all my fight fans out there. Let's tweet at the UFC. Let's, get on Facebook, their Facebook pages. Let's get on their YouTube channels. Let's get after them about weight cutting. Let's tell them it's enough. Enough is enough. The days are done of needing to have people drop weight dangerously to make a fight. Like, does anybody care? This is the problem. Because the rankings are set up the way they are and the weight classes are set up the way they are, Poirier Diaz will be fought at 155, and they'll both make weight. But wouldn't it be just as fun to see them both fight it at like 165, 170, which is closer to where they normally are? It'd be a lot more fun fight because neither one would be struggling to make weight. Neither one would be fatigued. Neither one would be over bloated after adding extra water that slows them down over the next day of rehydrating. There'd be you could eliminate all kinds of issues. So who cares if heavyweight goes from 225 to 255? If light heavyweight goes up to 225, or whatever wherever the weight classes land, and again, you can add a few extra weight classes in there. It's okay. Nobody's going to be hurt or upset if we do that. It's better than all these fights being canceled because people can't make weight, or just watching fighters fight overweight and at a disadvantage, or at an advantage over the person who actually did the work and made weight. And B, I'd rather see more weight classes and less interim titles than all these interim titles and less weight classes. It's not a big decision to make. You've fallen at, in the early days of UFC, there were plenty of non-title match, headlines for pay-per-views. Some of the biggest selling pay-per-views of all time are non-title matches, non-title fights. And you used to have title fights on the UFC on Fox, and now they won't do that at all, really. They want to put the title fights behind the paywall. You only have title fights for pay-per-view headliners, and then they wonder why their numbers struggle both on over-the-air broadcast, on cable, on the Fight Pass, on pay-per-view, because you're not making the most sensible fights. You're losing fights week of fight because of weight cutting, or you're losing interest in the fight because people are so overweight, that they just that people don't care as much. And then you're not penalizing fighters for missing weight. Darren Till just got done with a title fight after he missed weight by over 3 pounds in the fight he just fought before this one. So there's clearly no consequences for him for missing weight. So again, I could beat this drum forever, but again, as a group, as a collective, we have the power to call on the UFC to change their weight cutting practices. The fighters, again, should have long ago started their fighters union, and hopefully some of the retired fighters and those who've been banished away can still work to get it done, so the fighters can say enough of this weight cutting crap. Like, we want to be healthy and fight good fights. We want to fight against the people who are similar size to us. We don't want to continue to struggle to make weight, or not struggle to make weight, but then fight against someone who struggled to make weight, or someone who mastered the art of cutting 30 pounds, but then is able to have a day and a half to put it back on so they don't suffer any adverse effects from it. And again, we don't want to see any of our fellow fighters die from weight cutting. So I think that's all I'm going to talk about today. Like I said, I didn't want to make this too terribly long. A, because it's just myself. B, I think it stayed focused to one topic, the UFC, so hopefully that'll help those who want to listen to me talk about UFC find it, whereas if you don't, then you don't have to. But as always, you can follow me on Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, and YouTube at JASONBANICKI. This has been the Off Base Sports Podcast. You can find us on Twitter at Off Base Sports 1, on Instagram at Off Base Sports, and on Facebook at Off Base Sports Podcast. You can subscribe, rate, and review at iTunes, Google Play Music, Stitcher, Castbox. We're on Amazon Music, Satchel. I put it up on my YouTube channel. We're on Spotify. TuneIn Radio has us on there. So there's no excuse for not finding us, not sharing us, not letting everybody hear what we have to say, or in this case of me, what I have to say today. And I will talk to you guys later.